Gentlemen, we now go to the gentleman from Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Lurie, as I understand it, Congress in 2006 passed the Pandemic All Hazards Preparedness Act. We reviewed that and reauthorized it in this Congress, and one of the key points in that was establishing an Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, which is, of course, you, and this was supposed to be the focal point for these responses. You were quoted previously saying that you have responsibility for getting the nation prepared for public health emergencies, whether occurring disasters are man-made, as well as for helping it respond and recover. It's a pretty significant undertaking, end quote. And it just occurs to me, I'm glad to see you here, but I have not seen you out front. I know communications is supposed to be part of what you do. So have you been appearing at public meetings over the last several weeks in conjunction with Ebola? Have you been participating in any briefings for the public?
Let me start by saying, and repeating something I said in my testimony, that back in the spring, when we first learned about Ebola in West Africa, our whole office activated to start taking action on behalf of the country, on behalf of West Africa.
No, and I appreciate that, but can you speak, since this has become heightened with the American people in the last 3 or 4 weeks, it seems like your profile has been a lot lower than some of the other folks, even though your office is a key one. So how would you respond to that?
So I think one of the things we know about dealing with public health emergencies is the public does better if there are 1 or 2 consistent spokespeople. Dr. Frieden has played the major role in that because the CDC has the lead for the public health aspects of the response.
So what would you say about this? And I appreciate that. Let me ask you this. The President had what were billed in the press as emergency Ebola meetings at the White House, one last Friday and then a week ago tomorrow on Saturday after, I guess, he played a round of golf. Did you attend either of those meetings?
Our secretary attended those meetings, and I have met with her every single day since we got involved in this response.
But did you attend?
No, I did not.
Okay. And so has the White House or the Secretary of HHS instructed your office to stand down as being the point office in favor of this new Ebola czar?
Not at all.
Okay. So here's an issue. Thomas Eric Duncan brought Ebola to the U.S. Your office is clearly what was envisioned in this legislation, and yet he was able to bring the disease here. So what would were you guys prepared in your office for Thomas Eric Duncan, or did you drop the ball, and could you have done some things better?
So what happened with Mr. Duncan required a whole system to work, right? It required the federal components to be in place. It required state and local health departments to be in place. It required hospitals to be in place. And it required individual health providers, doctors or nurses, all to be able to do their job. Certainly, there were some breakdowns and links in the chain. Do I think that we've done a good job preparing hospitals and the healthcare system in our country for disasters? Yes, I do. Do I think we are being very aggressive now about preparing health professionals and healthcare providers and institutions to be able to recognize, treat, and isolate cases of Ebola? I think we are being very, very aggressive about that.
So how would you explain to me then, so the Pandemic Act seemed to have your office being kind of a point person, then HHS. Now we have this Ebola czar. So how does the chain of command work in terms of how we're confronting Ebola at this stage? Is the HHS assets, is everyone reporting to Ron Klain now, and then Klain is directly reporting to the President? What's your understanding of this?
So Mr. Klain's role and responsibility is to coordinate all the different aspects so that we are increasingly working in a whole of government response. It's to make sure that all the parties are working together on a day-to-day basis to make decisions.
But isn't that in your job description anyways? I mean, aren't you kind of a czar to deal with these pandemics?
Responsibility for dealing with medical and public health emergencies, particularly domestically. And the other thing that I think it's really important to recognize is that the bulk of this response is a global health response. It's not a domestic response. My office has been active along with the CDC, the NIH, the FDA, in meeting with the Secretary since the beginning of this, as I said, almost every day.
Well, I appreciate that. I know that the chairman invited Mr. Klain here. I wish he would have come so we can ask. Some people, as Mr. Gowdy pointed out, may have some reason to question whether this is the right individual to actually execute the medical component of this, or whether this is more for political reasons. I would have liked to have been able to ask him some questions to try to probe that further.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes.
For the record, we did invite him. We'd hoped he'd be here. We also invited the World Health Organization representative, and as you know, we fund about half of their entire budget, and their answer to us was that basically they don't do congressional hearings. So I'm sending a letter to the appropriators letting them know they don't do congressional hearings about how they're spending our money and how they're going to fight something like this. But it is an area of concern, as you say. You've got an attorney who's been hired to do this as a czar. You have the World Health Organization, and neither wanted to appear. I yield back.